My name is Suad Joseph. I'm the founder of the Arab Families Working Group. I am a professor of anthropology and women and gender studies at the University of California, Davis. Yes, the Arab Families Working Group is a group of 16 scholars whose research focuses on youth and families in Egypt, Lebanon, and Palestine, and their diasporas in the United States and Canada. We've been working together for 10 years. Since 2001, the group started, and we're continuing to work. Well, families are the absolutely most critical social institution in the Arab world. I would put them parallel to the state in terms of their centrality for understanding social life, economic life, political life in the Arab world. Hardly any social science text would be written without reference to the families. However, there'd actually been relatively little empirical, evidence-based research that focused rigorously on on Arab families and youth. So I saw a need for this research, empirical research, evidence-based research on Arab families and youth, and had for a number of years tried to pull people together, scholars together, to work collaboratively on this central area of research. The primary goal is first and foremost evidence-based research. We've identified a number of key problems related to families and youth, and we want to do collaborative research, comparative research, historical contemporary evidence-based research on the issues that we believe really matter to understanding the lives and conditions of families and youth. So the first and foremost goal that we have is rigorous research. The second goal that we have is outreach, working with NGOs, government agencies, other scholars, community groups for whom the family is an important site of their own action. To share our research, to collaborate with them in terms of what kind of research they are doing that could influence or shape what we're doing, and to have exchanges. So the second goal of the group is to make our work available to community groups on the ground working with Arab families and youth. The third goal is to try to translate some of this work into policy messaging so that decision makers have more rigorous evidence-based research to shape their decision making, their policies, their approaches to dealing with legislation or other kinds of policies that affect families and youth. So those are the three big arenas, and side by side with that, we are committed to literal translation, meaning taking our work, most of which is published in English first, and translating it into Arabic to make it available to local groups and to policymakers. We've grown in different ways. We started out actually with 22 members, went down to 15, then went back up to 16. So our membership has changed, but our core group has been the same since we started. That is, the people who are in the group, with the exception of one person who joined relatively late, have been involved in the Arab Families Group since 2001 when we started. So the membership is one area where you might say we've had some important transformations. I think the key is that we've grown intellectually, and we've grown in terms of the nature of our vision of what we could do. When we first started, we were purely focused on research. We wanted to get evidence-based research that was rigorous, comparative, and collaborative carried out and published and made available to scholars. We became very aware quickly after we started, within the first couple of years, that we needed to reach out to other organizations who were also involved with youth and families, who may be carrying out their own, perhaps less scholarly research, but nevertheless important research. So we started having stakeholder workshops, particularly for NGOs and community groups who were also interested in youth and families. We would attach to every single core group meeting that we had a day or an afternoon to invite local non-governmental organizations who are carrying out activities or research on youth and families to join us to share their concerns, their research, their activities, and we would share ours. And those were always very productive exchanges. So that was one of the important areas where we shifted. We also shifted, and we realized again that for this kind of engagement to continue, we would need to train another generation of scholars. It was very important to us that what we were learning as we were engaging in this project from each other needed to be passed on. So we began training younger scholars in research design and proposal writing. And now we attach to every workshop that we do a day-long session for graduate students, NGOs, policymakers, anyone who is working on these issues to come for a training session that typically is anywhere from 4 hours to a full day in research design and proposal writing. We've done some amazingly exciting research. I'll just give you a few examples. One example is one of our researchers, Ray Julaidini, has done work on Sri Lankan domestic workers in Lebanese households. How does having a domestic worker inside of the household change family relationships? Many people do not think of domestic workers as part of the family. And what he argues is they're living inside the home. They become a part of the family structure, and you have to understand that their presence within the family, in fact, transforms what the family is. And he has done 50-year history among certain families of domestic workers in these families. That's just one of the projects. Let me give you some more examples. Some of this research is really quite eye-opening. One of our teams is doing a collaborative research on marriages in Palestine during the various intifadas, the uprisings in Palestine. And they're a team of several researchers, Islah Judd, Penny Johnson, Annalise Morse, and Lamis Amanahla, have been comparing the pattern of marriages in the first Palestinian uprisings in 1987 and after the second uprising in the 1990s, and they found that there was there was an important difference in the kind of marriage patterns that occurred between the first uprising and the second uprising. The first uprising, there was this tendency for young women to feel that they should marry young men who were imprisoned, who had been martyrs, who had, not martyrs, but who had contributed to the cause and sacrificed for the cause. There was a very strong nationalist impulse. After the second uprising, there was less of a nationalist impulse, which indicates some important political transformations had taken place during that period of time in between the two Palestinian uprisings. Another one of the projects that is very interesting is about families in which the male head of household goes abroad to work and send money back. What happens to the woman, the wife, the female head of household who stays back at home taking care of the families while the husband is away? And she looks at the changing decision-making patterns during that period of time, and then what happens when the husband comes back. Very interesting transformations that happen in the whole question of women's empowerment. There's a fascinating research project on Iraqi refugees in Lebanon who came after the invasion of Iraq in 2003. How did they adjust to life in Lebanon? How do they transform their social relationships in that kind of refugee conditions? Another example of a fascinating research project is the project carried out by Barbara Ibrahim, who is a member of our group, on youth in Egypt and their volunteerism. At what point do they volunteer, and how do they volunteer? And she particularly looks at a few key organizations that are Islamist in orientation who are mobilizing youth to serve their country. And if you look at her research very carefully, many of the findings that she had in her research presage the kinds of Arab Spring transformations that occurred. Meaning that the kind of volunteerism and commitment to serve and commitment to the nation tell us something about how those youth are feeling about Egypt as a nation, and that their strong sense of making Egypt a better country, which they were trying to do through their volunteerism, channels itself into their willingness to go out into the streets once the possibility of transforming the Egypt politically was opened up. We innovated a model of research that is unparalleled. There isn't any other group that I know of that's been working together for 10 years on a single topic where the research is collaborative and comparative and interdisciplinary on Arab families and youth. So the research itself, I think, is one of the distinctive contributions we've made, and we've made this publicly available on the AFWG website. We translate our work and put it on the website for free public access. The second, I think, was our outreach, contributing, bringing in NGOs and community groups to work with us and share what we have managed to accomplish. Again, I think that's a rather unusual and innovative approach for a research group to be committed to making sure that community groups and NGOs share in the work that we're doing. The third arena is that training. Again, I don't know any other group that's out there that has a sustained research group that commits itself to training another generation of scholars to do this kind of work. That's a rather unusual commitment that we've actually practiced and carried out. And our last two grants from the Ford Foundation is precisely for training to researchers. We're training the next generation of leaders to develop evidence-based research for their policies and their work for change. The fourth, I've said three, but the fourth area really is where we have where we've done less work, but I think is important, our efforts to do so, is getting our work into policy friendly formats so that decision makers can have this research available to them in briefs. AFHG will no doubt continue doing its research for some time to come. The group is very committed to continuing the kinds of projects that we have. We're planning in the immediate future a conference that will take place in Cairo in May of 2012, focusing especially on the role of families in the Arab Spring and the impact of the Arab Spring on families and youth. But we will be planning other fora and continuing to publish and continuing to translate our work into Arabic.